Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Transylvaniacs, the cajoling and reviewing of Dracula films done by two longtime friends, as we try to make our way through as many of them as we possibly can.
Each episode, we try to explore every film adaptation of Dracula, from Dracula A to Dracula Z.
Wow. You know what, honestly, I thought that would have gotten old by now, but it doesn't. I find it comforting. I think it's sweet.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because even if you did get sick of it, I was never going to let that joke go.
Oh, no. I don't expect you to. You shouldn't. It's kind of your baby as far as jokes go, and was the alternate name for the podcast for a while.
Yeah, the process of trying to name this podcast was just hurling any dumbass name idea we could come up with back at each other via Discord for, I think, like 2 months.
Literally, perhaps 2 months. I think you came up with all of the good ones. I really have a hard time naming things. Like, whenever people ask me for help with that, with like songs, artwork, anything, I'm like, I have no fucking clue, and I'm not going to be able to help you with this. So you did most of the legwork there, but and came up with the winner. So congrats on that, my friend.
It was this, or name it cereal and try and confuse people.
That got me. That was unexpected. Oh, man. Well, how the hell have you been, Will?
I'm doing all right. I know we've both recovered from bouts of COVID since our last episode came out.
We have. I was actually listening back to the last episode and heard myself say, I haven't gotten COVID yet, and was like, fuck you, Colleen.
Yep, I'm sorry, and I don't mean this in an offensive way. I actually laughed when I heard you say that.
I mean, you should. You should laugh, because it came out like literally, let's see, it was supposed to be published the day I tested positive, and there was like, no way in hell am I doing this work right now. I'm going to go lay down and have chills in my bed by myself. And then, suddenly had a lot of time on my hands when I wasn't like violently shaking. But yeah, that was not the most fun I've ever had. It wasn't terrible, but it was not like great.
Yeah. I can now walk up steep staircases without getting winded again. That's great. It's very nice for me.
Really happy to hear that. I didn't have really any respiratory symptoms, but I did just feel really sore. Like I felt like I had just taken a hike, but every day for like 15 days. How long did you test positive?
12 days.
Oh, I was 11. You beat me, fucker.
Eat it.
That's brutal, though. My story isn't as good as yours. I have no idea where I got it. You definitely acquired yours in New Jersey, but I wish that I had been in Ohio recently so I could be like, fucking Ohio, man. I could just shit on it. It's been too long since I shit on Ohio.
Yeah. It is your God-given right as a former Ohio resident.
Thank you. I was briefly in Columbus last weekend, though. I drove to about an hour east of Indianapolis to see a friend. And it was fun to pass through Ohio and be like, oh, God, remember this shit? I did pass by the hotel, which is, as you said so eloquently many years ago, absolutely fucked up with water slides.
It is fucked up with water slides.
Still on the side of the road on I-70. Oh, man.
Bless.
God bless. Well, today we are taking a look at Count Dracula from 1977, which is a British television adaptation. This aired on the BBC in December of 1977 and is considered the most faithful adaptation. I don't really know if that's true to date, and at this point I am skeptical of any claim any Dracula film makes about literally anything, but after watching it and looking at what we have seen so far, I'm inclined to say that that's true. Would you agree?
Yeah, this is within spin distance of what the book actually is.
Which is shocking, considering we've seen some kind of wild shit or some really weird cuts that don't make sense. Do you want to kind of fill us in on the personnel behind this here production?
Absolutely. The director of this piece was Philip Saville. We have a screenplay by Gerald Savory, who is also a screenwriter for Hitchcock. at one point. And cinematographer, we've got Peter Hall. Do we want to launch into who our cast is for this one?
Why not? We're already here,
right.
you know?
Count Dracula in this production is the French actor Louis Jourdan. Colleen, you might remember him from a little movie called Swamp Thing.
You know what? I had a feeling he looked familiar, and I cannot fucking believe he was in the Swamp Thing movie. Like the one with Ray Wise, the 80s one?
Yes, that one.
Oh my god. I didn't look into his career at all for some reason, because, like, he just looked familiar, but I think I kind of just assumed he was, you know, just vaguely French, and I might have been being racist towards French people. Last time I was racist towards British people, this time I'm racist towards French people.
Just making your way across Europe.
Yep. But I am absolutely thrilled that he was in Swamp Thing. Someday we're gonna have to do a bonus episode where we watch the fucking Swamp Thing movie, because I love Swamp Thing, and I'm so glad that you do too.
I would do this in a heartbeat.
Oh,
I feel like we should set this up as a Patreon goal, but first we need a Patreon, so that sounds really difficult, so maybe we should just do this anyway.
Just for fun, you know, we'll get there. We'll get there.
All right, we've got Jonathan Harker, played by Bosco Hogan, who sort of looks like if Tom Petty was British.
Yeah, yep.
Mina in this version is played by Judy Bowker. We have got Lucy, played by Susan Penhaligon? I don't know. Dr. Seward is Mark Burns. Quincy Holmwood, we're combining some characters again, is played by Richard Barnes. Frank Finlay is Van Helsing, and we have got Renfield back in this one, played by an actor called Jack Shepard, who I think you in your notes call the possible love child of Neil Gaiman and David Tennant.
Am I wrong?
You're not. I'd say
not.
He's also got like a little bit of, oh god, I'm blanking, Harry Dean Stanton from Alien.
Yes, 100%. Like that era specifically of Harry Dean Stanton. Wow, pour one out for my man. But yeah, I can see that specifically in some of his mannerisms. But wow, yeah, okay, so interesting cast here. I think the only person that, you know, would be recognized from our list, like our listeners may recognize, would be Louis Jourdan. But yeah, this was an interesting one. So this, again, is a television adaptation. So this was broadcast on the BBC in its entirety in 1977. And I emphasize its entirety because this is 2.5 McFucking hours long. And that is, you know, it is one of the more accurate adaptations, but its length is, in my opinion, a bit to its detriment. However, in later screenings of this on the BBC, it was broken up into 3 sections, which turns it into a bit of a mini-series and does, I think, make a bit more sense because this is a tough one to sit through for 2.5 hours. As we were discussing prior to recording this episode, both of us had to break this up because I cannot sit still for that long.
Yeah, to pull behind the curtain a little bit onto the production of the show, I don't think either of us realized this was that long until earlier this week before we recorded it, when we decided to watch it. And I went to sit down and put it on YouTube and noticed the video was like 2.5 hours long. I'm like, no, surely that's not right. There's got to be like some padding or something, or it just runs long for some copyright loophole. And then it dawned on me, no. Clicking through, this movie is 2.5 hours long.
Oh, fuck.
And listen, I'm pretty good at watching longer movies. I love The Lord of the Rings. I watched all of them through my COVID recovery. But 2.5 hours, when you're not expecting 2.5 hours, that grabs you.
That grabs you, and when it's a movie that you are not already familiar with, and it's like a fairly dry adaptation in a lot of the ways. Like, this isn't as boring as the 1971 Count Dracula, which definitely wins the award for most desperately boring version we've seen. Like, this one has some fun stuff in it, but its length is really rough. You said you did 2 different sittings for this, like an hour 15 each?
Yeah, I did an hour 15 each. It worked out because it roughly landed towards the end of the Lucy segment, which is really like its own half of the book or own episode there anyway. So you can get through that, and then you just come back for the back half, which is all the stuff with Mina at the end.
All the stuff with Mina and like kind of the more action-y sequences. Like there's a lot going on, and that's what's kind of interesting about the structure of the book. And, you know, this is a show about adaptations, and it is a difficult novel to adapt, primarily due to its structure. I get why they split this into 3 episodes, because I do feel like there are kind of 3 distinct parts to the novel. But that is kind of tricky to get on screen in a way that makes sense and is correctly paced for a film. And we'll talk about that a little bit, because I don't know if they were super successful in that regard. If it's any indication into what my brain works like, I had to watch this in 35-minute chunks. So I watched this in 4 separate sittings over the course of 2 days. But I would watch a bit of it and then like get up and go do stuff, and then come back and sit down, because I watch these at my computer. And while my, desk chair is semi-comfortable, I am bisexual, so I can't sit right, and I'm just moving around the whole time, and my knees are like over my head and shit by the end of this. So anyway, yeah, I think we should just kind of jump right in, since this is very, very faithful, like almost exact in terms of the plot. I don't think that we need to do a plot summary, but let's kind of discuss, if you think it's a good idea, some of the major departures that we see in this version. First and foremost being what we have seen a couple times already, which is the combining of some of the characters in the Gang of Light. However, this time, as opposed to kind of crushing them all into Arthur Homewood, or just kind of having a mix and match of who's around, we actually got a bona fide Quincy. Were you thrilled, Will?
I was delighted when
you should
this
be.
guy, when Richard Barnes shows up on the screen and does that wonderful, horrible Texas accent.
Oh my God.
I howled.
You should howl. And yeah, so he's called Quincy P. Homewood in this version, and he is the combination of Quincy and Arthur. So instead of, 3 competing suitors, Lucy has 2. But I am so happy that we got a Quincy who is actually American, because the last time, I think is it 1971 Dracula or Hammered Dracula? I cannot remember, where we got a Quincy who was just British.
Oh, that was 71. That was the other movie from the 70s called Count Dracula.
Oy vey. They hired an American actor and made him do a British accent, and I was like, are you shitting me right now? So it was delightful to finally get our cowboy in Whitby. So that was great, and I think that in terms of an adaptational move is one that makes sense to me. It is, while it would be fun to have kind of our polycule, if you will, dicking around, you don't really need all 3 of them for narrative purposes. Like, they serve similar roles, particularly Arthur and Quincy. So I think it makes sense to combine them. I think having Dr. Seward as a kind of, he and Van Helsing get combined a lot. I think it was interesting to have them both in this, personality-wise, even though I didn't super care for the writing of Seward. But combining at least a few of them makes sense. I think distilling them all down into one is not beneficial to any screenplays we've seen. But I thought this was a good choice for an adaptation. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think particularly with this version, how they're presenting it, I think having Quincy be the one that takes command and is the sort of dominant role, rather than Seward being this being an English lord, adds some much needed character and flavor to an adaptation that could just become too impossibly British and dry without that role.
He was the antidote to being fucking British. The other major departure in terms of character is that in this version, Mina and Lucy are sisters. And I think that we are, after looking at your notes, on the same page here, which is asking the question, why? Why? Why would you make Lucy and Mina sisters? Does it serve the screenplay? Does it serve the film? Does it serve the characters? I'm inclined to say no. Do you? What's your thoughts on this?
You know, I was wondering about that, and then I think it clicked for me in the scene where they're, for some reason, being tucked into bed together by their mom and having their conversation. And I realized, oh, is this trying to just, like, be like, they're not gay? There's nothing sapphic happening here.
Oh my god, you're so right. And they're sharing, like, literally a twin bed. Oh, you know what? I think you're correct about that. Like, no, they're not gay. The other solution would to have them be, like, in separate rooms. Like, you know, but whatever. Yeah, this was a weird choice for me. And it's, you know, immediate because the first scene of the film is Mina, Lucy, and Mrs. Westenra, you know, seeing Jonathan off, I think.
Yeah, very abruptly, to the point where I was like, did I miss something? Like, a title sequence or something here?
Nope. I wound up watching this on the Internet Archive, actually, because the version on YouTube had Spanish subtitles, and my audio processing is already bad enough that I'm like, I can't hear English and read Spanish. That will make it worse than just trying to read English without subtitles, which is already pretty bad. But there was a very funny and brief title card in the YouTube version that just said BBC special interest, which made me laugh a little. But yeah, it opens extremely abruptly, and then immediately, like, they both refer to her as mom, and I was, mummy. So I was like, oh, I guess that's a weird change. But you know what, Will? I like your take that this was just so they could be shown in a twin bed together without it being gay.
I mean, it's got to be the reason.
It has to be. It really has to be. In terms of other departures from the novel, this one is really, really by the book. Like, there's a couple of sections that are condensed, just, you know, for length and clarity, but we get a lot of direct quotes from the novel, and it follows it pretty much beat for beat, including some things that we have yet to see in other adaptations. I'm trying to think if there is anything else that was like a major change. There's definitely a lot of differences from the other films we've watched thus far, but from the novel itself, this, I think, is earning its title of most faithful.
Yeah, this one absolutely claims the crown right now for faithfulness to the text.
And again, like, faithful does not a good adaptation make. It takes different changes for whatever medium you're working with. Like, you can't expect to directly translate one to the other. But I think that this was pretty good. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I think that some of the things we're going to spend a lot of time talking about are the performances and then some of the production values. You said it was hard for you to find much about the production of this, right?
So yes, either the production of this was very boring or else someone's not talking about it, because there are really no articles online or sites I could find that actually went into much about the history of the making of this film. What I could find is that Gerald Savory, who is a screenwriter who wrote screenplays for Hitchcock, including Young and the Innocent, was billed above the director. I feel like they were trying to promote this as a writer's Dracula. It seemed like BBC believed in it so much that they actually canceled a Doctor Who serial. They were going to do a serial about the Doctor fighting vampires, and they were afraid that this would be perceived as a spoof of Dracula, and they just axed the whole thing.
That's kind of fascinating. It takes a lot for British TV to pick something over Doctor Who, so... But yeah, I didn't see any crazy stories about this. We've had a lot of movies recently that have had, like, really wild backgrounds, like Klaus Kinski not knowing he was in a Dracula film. But this seems pretty cut and dry, and that makes sense. This very much seems like a classical production to me. It obviously has some horror elements, but this is pretty nicely produced to some degree. Something that I thought was really interesting in terms of the cinematography is this is shot very kind of cut and dry from like 80% of the scenes. And then whenever something involving Dracula or really any of the vampires happens, we go to this absolutely batshit like psychedelic music video zone. including some crazy negative shots, which I kind of loved and really came out of nowhere. Lots of overlay, just kind of some artistic choices that I was really not expecting from what, until, maybe 20 minutes in, has sold itself as a desperately dry theatrical version of Dracula. But to see these wild psychedelic 70s bits come out of nowhere was a lot of fun, and that they carried those throughout, I thought was a good time.
Oh yeah. No, they were such an out of left field choice. They remind me a lot, like, I don't know if you've ever seen those like film performances of Black Sabbath from the early 70s, but
oh my God,
have
yes,
those same kind of visual overlays in negative reverse shots.
Wait, you're totally right. I wonder if that's intentional, because this is 1977, so like that would kind of be like peak Sabbath.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's just like, that's what British TV and film producers were doing if they wanted to be a little bit spooky, a little on edge.
Woo!
I mean, I think they're really silly, but I want to think that maybe in England, a country that forbade Monster Mash from being played on the radio for fear of it being too morbid, mind you, might have seen these overlays and these reverse, like, in these negative shots and be like, dear God, this is the end of our nation.
Yeah, I would believe it. It was interesting to me that this was specifically made for TV, and kind of thinking about the reaction that the Hammer Dracula from, just under 20 years prior got, whereas this one is a bit more transgressive, in my opinion, and it aired, like, on television, whereas 1958 Hammer Dracula got an X rating. So that's kind of funny to kind of see the cultural shift. But yeah, the cinematography and production in general is really back and forth between very stagnant, not quite stagey, but like kind of verging on soap opera aesthetics, combined with, as you said, an early Black Sabbath video. And I thought that was a ton of fun. The first time you see that, there's like one shot where Jonathan is shaving in the castle and Dracula comes up behind him. You can't see him in the mirror. He takes the mirror, fucking throws it away, and then the next shot of Dracula is a crazy negative, which was so much fun. Anyway, in terms of some other, before we get into the performances and then kind of our general reviews and things we liked, this was kind of a strange one for me in terms of production values, because it looks pretty good, but when it doesn't look good, it looks really bad. Does that make sense to you?
That makes a lot of sense to me, yes.
We've talked a lot about sets, and this one has a lot that was filmed on location, it looks like, and that is always to the benefit of a film, in my opinion. But the internal shots, particularly in the first section with Jonathan and Dracula in the castle, look okay, like acceptable. But the lighting is really, really bad. I don't know if you noticed that, but there are scenes where Jonathan and Dracula are like walking down these hallways where I legitimately just like cannot fucking see them. And then a couple minutes later, they will be lit so harshly. Like, there's something to be said for harsh lighting when you're trying to create a dramatic shadow on somebody's face, particularly in like a horror film. But if you were going back and forth between that and like darkness so much that it looks like I can't see what's happening, that just kind of seemed like an oversight to me in terms of how this film was made, in the scenes that take place inside in particular. And it's kind of tough to start a film like that. And something that we talked a little bit about is that like the first half of this film is not nearly as strong as the second, and that's kind of tough because it feels like it drags, it's less visually interesting. And the pacing of the screenplay in particular, I think, is a little too slow and kind of lacking.
You make an interesting point, particularly about the visuals and that the lighting and its very classical television structure, because I feel like a lot of the modern criticism for this that I tend to agree with is that the cinematography in this version is some of the dullest in a Dracula adaptation. And I think that's incredibly true. Compared with the Dan Curtis version, which was made by an actual soap opera producer, that one was so much more visually lush. There was some truly arresting camera work in individual shots in that version, and outside of the visual effects, I cannot recall any shots perfectly in this version.
No, I can't either. And like, when I think of if you were to say like, okay, what's one image you think of, it would be one of those like kooky psychedelic sequences. But that's just a stylistic choice as opposed to, actual mise en scène, if you will, or fucking whatever. But I'm in agreement with that criticism. I also found the scoring and music of this version to be really strange. There were kind of like long sections of silence, which is not, rare. We've seen that in a lot of the older films we've watched in particular. But pretty much every time Dracula shows up, there's like a xylophone sound cue. Like, it's literally like, bring. And that is fucking goofy as hell to me. I have no idea why they did that. And it really takes you out of it in the moment. And I feel like if you were to like recut this film and put either no scoring or some minimal kind of horror scoring in there and just take out the fucking xylophone, it would be a substantially better movie. And it kind of makes me sad that like one weird audio decision can kind of fuck up a film so much. You know what I mean?
Colleen, have you ever seen the show Bewitched?
A long, long time ago. Oh my god.
Because the xylophone or chime or whatever it is sounds like whenever magic is used on Bewitched. That is the sound cue.
You're completely right. And that's, I think, why it struck me as like comical. Like it's like a comedy sound effect. That's fucking weird, man. And I thought that was really odd. However, I feel like I'm going a little too hard on this movie right up front. I'm sorry. I just got so distracted because we were talking about visuals and like how I enjoyed some of the really wild choices they made. And then some of the other choices, I was like, why are we doing this? Anyway, let's take a step back here. Would you like to either go over some performances or discuss some of the like kind of plot and thematic things that we saw in this version that we haven't seen in some other versions? What makes sense for you today, Will?
Well, I think we're going to get into the performances because I feel like that is what makes and breaks this movie in a lot of ways. I'm going to go right up front and talk a little bit about Louis Jourdan and what he was trying to bring to his performance. I like in previous episodes, we've gotten sort of a window into what the performers are trying to do with the character and how they were trying to set themselves apart from previous versions. And Louis Jourdan was really trying to make a version of Dracula that was sensual above all else and someone whose actions you might in some weird way agree with. There's a long quote I have from him, if you'll indulge me here.
I shall.
What is so interesting in playing Dracula is that I try to make monstrosity, or, if you prefer, villainy, attractive. Very attractive. If we succeed in that, we have won our day. If the audience can be troubled enough to say that maybe Dracula is right in what he says, then we have won. He is an angel. A fallen angel. I think Dracula should be played as an extremely kind person who truly believes he is doing good. He gives eternal life. He takes blood and he gives blood. Therefore, he gives an exchange which is symbolic of love and the sexual act, such as in the scene we were just doing in which Dracula gives his blood to Mina Harker.
That is the most French shit I have ever heard. Him being like, I want to make a monster. Like, I want you to understand the monster within. He should be very sensual. I'm like, yeah, no shit, Louise. We know that's what you're going for. I mean, I can see what he's talking about. I think he was successful in his goal. If his goal was to bring a sensuality to the role, he definitely does. Again, unbelievably French. Like, that quote is really sending me because if you watch this and then think about that, it will become abundantly clear that is what he was going for. I don't know how I feel about it, though, to be totally honest with you. I'm not sure. I think he was successful in what he set out to do, but I'm not sure that I liked it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I have my doubts. I I understand what he is going for,
Right.
and I don't think he accomplishes it very well.
That's valid. I think that, like, particularly the stuff about, like, you want to agree with him. Absolutely not. Like, he was not successful in that at all. He reads like a fucking creep. But I think on a surface level, he was successful in his goal of, like, a sensual Dracula. Like, this is a romantic thing. You can see that in the scenes with Mina in particular. But yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. I think that this was not our best Drac, and it just kind of goes to prove the age-old saying is, as long as we've had this podcast, you can either have a good Dracula and a bad movie, or a good movie and a bad Dracula. And I would say this is a pretty good movie with, like, a kind of bad Dracula. It middles on both, you know?
I think the problem is outside of those scenes with Mina where he's trying to sell that sensuality. He really is just not bringing any energy or heat to any other scenes with other characters. He's very flat and very even in any scene with John, with any scene with Van Helsing even. There's just, he never raises his voice. He never goes into sort of the threatening mode that you see other Draculas. He doesn't have that feral energy that Bela brings in a couple scenes. I think it's lacking. You can't just be bringing this sensuality for, like, your handful of scenes with one woman. I think, unfortunately, this is also our straightest Dracula, and therefore our most boring, I'm afraid.
Yeah, this was a painfully heterosexual film. I agree with you there. I think that particularly your notes about you can't be saving that all for a handful of scenes with one woman. I thought that I liked in the first segment with Jonathan in the castle where we got some of the themes from the novel regarding, like, a model immigrant, where he's like, you will stay here to teach me English. My goal is to speak English so perfectly that nobody can tell it's a second language. That made sense to me in terms of the text, but that's not Louis Jourdain bringing that to the table. That's the screenwriter. And I did like that he was a little more of a fast talker. Like, his lines were delivered more quickly than some of our Draculas in the past, which can tend toward the, like, I am Dracula, and we would be here for 3.5 hours if he was doing that, as opposed to 2.5. But I agree with you. There was not enough heat to this. Like, you've got to have, I know you're really trying to make a monster sympathetic, but all you're really doing is making a monster boring, which is too bad. And I did not really super care for his performance. And that quote, I think, is kind of illuminating to his mindset. However, on the other side of the spectrum, this is the best Mina we've had in, like, a fucking minute. We've had so many boring Minas in a row, but she did a really good job.
She really did, especially in the back half of the movie. She gets so much agency. She gets to do a lot. She gets to, like, take some shots at Dracula with a rifle. I mean,
like, with a literal gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like Judy Bowker's performance a lot. I think that I think in the past couple films we've watched, Mina has verged too much into ingenue territory, whereas this Mina immediately, like, one of her first lines in the film is, like, I will practice my shorthand. And, like, that's really integral to the plot of the novel, is that, like, she is very inquisitive and has a thirst for knowledge. And you definitely see that even in Judy Bowker's, like, physicality. Like, she looks very alert and inquisitive and sharp at all times. And like you said, particularly in the back half, she has all this agency. And I really liked that the Gang of Light treats her with the respect she deserved and the respect that she gets in the novel.
I think you summed it up really well. I don't know if I have much more to add about that. I could go on about just how much I like her in this role, but you really nailed it.
Thank you. I was thinking about it a lot. Like, I've been really gunning for a good Mina because we've had so many boring ones in a row. Like, there's one scene in particular I'm thinking of where Van Helsing says to her, like, Mina, you are the wisest among us. And I'm like, yeah, you motherfucking bitch, she is. Like, I was rooting for her. We were all rooting for you. Sorry. But, you know, like, we just haven't had that in a while. Like, this is a difficult piece to adapt because you have a couple of protagonists. And this one did a really good job of making you like actually give a shit about Mina, especially after watching what happens to Lucy. So let's talk a little bit about Lucy then, I guess. I cannot remember this actress's name. Oh, excuse me, Susan Penhaligon. I'm gonna let you go first on this one, and then I'll chime in later.
I feel like with Lucy, we see the kind of classic trap that all of them have fallen into to some degree, where she's told to play very docile or just sort of lightly hint of flirtatious throughout most of the role until after she succumbs to Dracula, and then she really gets to act it up. Because she gets to do some very physical acting, and really, they have some great close-ups on her face after she's turned into a vampire. And she just gets to like let loose and wail and give this unhinged feral performance. But up to that point, you don't get a lot of that same personality or a lot to hang your hat on.
I'm totally in the same boat. I was not sold on her performance at first, and again, I think that's more the fault of the direction than the acting. I also found it kind of odd that she was very childlike in the first chunk of the film. Like, there's this whole segment where she's kind of like skipping up the stairs and like counting at Whitby, and like that was kind of odd to me because the whole thing with the interplay between Mina and Lucy personality-wise is that, like, Mina is more reserved, and Lucy is more adventurous, and, like, you know, the subtext of the novel is that, like, she has 3 suitors, like, she's kind of a slut, and she's a new woman. I did not think that translated well here. And that kind of like weird childlike energy and, like you said, like hint of flirtation that she brought was odd, but you totally nailed it with the second half of her arc was really, really good and very, very scary. Like that leaned into the horror a lot, I felt.
I think even in the way that this version of Lucy is dressed, in the way that her hair is styled, gives her this sort of like childlike, doll-like appearance. And it feels like a choice, and actually, frankly, a pretty unsavory one, considering the very sexual overtone to Dracula's attack on Lucy.
You are so correct.
It gives a real squick factor to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I found it odd that she was played up as so childlike at the beginning. And you're totally right with the styling. I didn't think of that, but it's bang on. So yeah, I guess we should talk about that. In the novel and in a lot of different versions we've seen so far, particularly Dracula's attacks can be read as a metaphor for rape. In this version, it is not a metaphor for rape, it is just rape. And this is the most explicit I think we have seen. It will get worse when we watch the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula. It will get much worse. But this was really sexually explicit. And you are correct that having, the OG Lucy be infantilized like that is really icky, and I don't like it, and I don't think it serves the plot nor the quality of the film. But yeah, this is kind of a tough one to watch. Yeah,
it was genuinely very shocking. I was surprised it was in this.
I was too, and again, like, this aired on television in the 70s. And, in the first attack in the graveyard is highly sexualized, and then the second one, it is implied that she's nude, and that, she's literally being raped. So that was surprising to me that wound up in this version. I don't know if it was gratuitous. Like, I'm trying to figure out if I think if it's effective or gratuitous. I haven't really made up my mind yet. I'm leaning toward gratuitous.
Yeah, that's the way the wind's blowing for me too.
I think you can lean on the metaphor. You can lean harder than some of the other versions, which have, given us like a courtesy cut and Dracula brings his cape up. Like, you can go a little harder than that, but you don't have to show us somebody who is implied to like perhaps be a teenager, being literally raped. Like we don't have to see that. Yeah, it's pretty yucky. But again, the second half of her performance, particularly when she is going feral, was pretty striking. And we've had a couple of decent Lucys in a row, so I'm glad that this continues the trend there.
Yeah, I think overall Lucy's gonna be the character we're gonna find time and time again is really in desperate need of a fresh take and
Yeah, man.
a fairer take, I think.
Yeah, she really like everybody in this cast has the potential to get the shit end of the stick. But more often than not, it winds up being Lucy and Jonathan. Speaking of Jonathan, we've got Bosco Hogan, or as you said, British Tom Petty, which is devastatingly accurate. I would describe him as completely acceptable.
Honestly, I feel like he embodied Harker pretty well. I think he's on the higher end of the Harkers that we've seen so far. He does, like you mentioned, he does get done dirty a little bit, and like a lot of other Jonathans, he's kind of this milksop, especially in the first half. I'm using a lot of like very old-timey slang this episode.
I love it, though.
I'm just
here
gonna
for
roll
it.
with it.
I'm here for it.
But I think he really gets to flourish in the back half, like a lot of these characters. He gets to bring that rage that you see in Jonathan in the book, that a lot of the other versions have not successfully translated.
Totally. And I think that just, again, talking about Lucy's performance and then Jonathan's, really emphasizes the fact that the back half of this film is like really good. And the first half is not bad, but like by no means excellent. But I'm completely in agreement with you there. I think he, as the film goes on, does a better job, and this is one of the best Jonathans we've seen. I also really liked in the castle segment. I feel like the past couple films we've watched have had a shortened castle section, which is fine. It can drag. But I liked that you actually saw him like certifiably start to go a little nuts. Kind of see this mounting panic in him, which we've not really seen before. Like him kind of desperately trying to open these doors and then confronting Dracula much more aggressively than other Jonathans. I thought that was a good spin. And like you said, that rage that we see in the novel was nice to see for once here. I guess that brings us next to Frank Finlay as Professor Van Helsing, who I don't think I've seen him in anything, but he's has had a pretty prolific stage career, particularly in London. And he was in the 1965 film adaptation of Othello as Iago, which is fun, and I would love to see that because I love some Othello. But what did you think of his performance?
This is actually one of my favorite Van Helsings we've seen so far.
Dude, yes, same.
I think that Peter Cushing is still my favorite because he is so warm and such a gregarious, likable character, but I really like this version. This is a version that feels to me the most like how Van Helsing is portrayed in the book and how I imagine him. He's got a lot of fun, kind of quirky little expressions, and he's gets to be a little doddering but also really know his shit.
Are you familiar with the website TV Tropes?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Okay. If he was a TV Tropes page, he would fall under Bunny Ears Lawyer, I think. Which is kind of your like expert who is like really kind of quirky and weird. A great example of that would be your Dale Cooper. Like you're like a guy who knows his like, as you said, knows his shit, but is really just kind of odd and a little silly. I completely agree. I loved watching him.
Yeah, I think when you have a good Van Helsing, it can really anchor the rest of the cast and give them someone fun to play off of. Which is, I think, why I'm a little sad that you don't get any real heat in his interactions with Dracula. I think those two are such a great pair, and their dynamic is really fun in other adaptations and in the book. And there should be something here, and it's not in this version.
Totally. Like you kind of want to get the sense that they're like mortal enemies. And you really don't get that here. And they're not on screen together much anyway, but it was, I I'm in agreement with you there. But I really liked his scenes with the whole gang. I loved how he treated Mina like a little paternally, like in the scenes where she's kind of fighting off the local Romani people that are after them, and she's got the rifle and she saves Jonathan, and he's just like, well done, Mina, like in the background. Like he just seems like a proud dad. My wife and I have been watching a ton of Buffy the Vampire Slayer lately, and there's definitely shades of Giles here, like your buttoned up guy who like eventually just lets loose and like really cares for this young woman in a really sweet way. I really enjoyed watching him. I thought you are correct that a good Van Helsing anchors the cast in a way that's like desperately necessary, especially when your Dracula is lacking.
Which I guess brings us to Quincy Holmwood. Is that Quincy
Yes.
Holmwood is the one they went with.
Quincy P. Holmwood. What does the P stand for? Nobody knows. It's made up.
Listen, we have very different notes on this accent because I think they are both in all caps. But the notes are for you, not this accent for Quincy, please no. And mine are Quincy's accent, fuck yes.
We really went on opposite sides of the coin. You know what? As it went on, I didn't hate it. I think it just surprised me with how aggressive it is. And Richard Barnes really tried, and he went over the top, which I appreciate. But there were, again, the TV tropes page for him would be, ooh, me accent slipping. Oh man!
I think we can chalk up Keanu Reeves' accent in 92 Dracula as revenge for this guy trying to do an American accent.
He was trying so hard. I liked this Quincy. It was fun to have a cowboy back in the action. He did a good job. He kind of looks like Jared Leto.
No, don't do this to me.
I mean, sorry, erase that. Don't worry about it. He did great though. I thought he was fun. I thought he was a good combination of protective and like doting on Lucy, but like not boring or paternalistic. He did a really good job. Again, the accent is so much. When I did study abroad in London and did like a theater intensive, sorry, I know, but we saw a couple of plays a week, ranging from like West End productions to like tiny little stuff like in the back of a pub. But something that we would always laugh at is when British actors try to do American accents, because the easiest accent for somebody who is British to do is like Southern Belle, like deep South, because you're not pronouncing R's, right? So to hear him try to do Texas, where you pronounce a lot of R's, was a very funny choice, and is always what happens in productions where people have a really over-the-top American character. It's like, all right, think of the most American person you can, and everybody all immediately goes for like Texan cowboy. So hearing this be so over-the-top, even though it was spottily done, does amuse me. I did not hate it. I found your enthusiasm for it refreshing. There you go.
I think we need to make more movies that are set in Pittsburgh, because I think we need to get more British stage actors racking their brains trying to figure out how to do a Pittsburgh accent.
Can you imagine? Yeah, like trying to like get Millie Bobby Brown to be like, all right, now I'm gonna say this for you, Millie, and I'm gonna need you to repeat it back to me. Yin's gone to the Steelers game downtown later. And then watch her head explode. Let's see, who else have we got here? All right, last two. Mark Burns is Dr. Seward. Man, I'd love to see a good on-screen Seward. I don't think we have yet.
No, we really haven't. I don't think adaptations know how to make Seward not be a weenie.
I mean, like, he kind of is a weenie, but he's an important weenie to the plot, you know?
Yeah. As they say in the episode where they have to, of The Simpsons, where they have to go get Principal Skinner back after he's found to be an imposter, he's our weenie.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's our weenie. Yeah, I don't have anything to say about this. Like it was pretty boring. I'm glad he was in it, but I would love to see an adaptation know what to do with him. And that brings us to last but certainly not least, Jack Shephard as the love child of Neil Gaiman, David Tennant, and Harry Dean Stanton circa 1978. Jack Shephard is Renfield. I liked this Renfield a lot. We have not had an on-screen Renfield in a while. And, the previous one we had was, again, from the other 70s Count Dracula, which was Klaus Kinski not having any lines. And I thought this was, again, the kind of most book-accurate Renfield because he's occasionally lucid, but his moments of violence and timidness kind of swinging back and forth wildly on this pendulum is pretty captivating to watch. I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, this is, I think, by far our saddest Renfield that you see on screen.
It was hard. I feel bad. It was a sad one.
Yeah, I think especially because, like in the book, spoiler, he gets killed by Dracula and really violently. Like, Dracula tears him apart. And seeing him, they show him just laying on the floor covered in blood, and it's really rough. You feel so bad for him. That kind of, I guess, brings us a little bit to, like, some of the violence in this was a little surprising to me. Again, we've talked about the scenes with Lucy, but Renfield's death really took me by surprise because, again, we haven't had a Renfield on screen for fucking ever. But sometimes they just have him killed off screen or not really killed at all. But this was violent. And I thought that the effects were actually pretty decent for the time. There was some decent blood in this. And they nailed him, dude. I was sad. You just said something that kind of made something click for me, and I'm going to try and run with it here, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
I think what makes a lot of this very upsetting, both sort of the sexual violence and other forms of violence in this, is that they're not stylized at all.
No.
I think I wrote in my notes that this is like a consciously uncamp version of Dracula. They
totally,
for all the psychedelic effects, they play it very straight, and because you're not getting like a campy or Grand Guignol version of these effects, it just feels very stark and kind of unpleasant.
Yeah, dude, I am completely in agreement, and I think that is a very astute observation. Like the scene where, Quincy stakes Lucy really was very graphic and pretty shocking to me, and I think that, again, Susan Penhaligon's performance, particularly her vocal performance, was like I felt like I was watching somebody like fucking die, dude. Like that was tough to watch, and I think that your assessment that it's trying really, really hard not to be campy is the root of that, totally.
Yeah, I mean, when Renfield, he throws himself on the floor and he's repeating a phrase over and over and entering this episode, it doesn't feel like Dwight Fry in the 30s going and doing this sort of camp performance or doing this heightened, almost comedy bit. It feels real. It feels real.
Yeah, it really does.
And not in the same way that people were saying that Klaus Kinski isn't playing that, he's just mad. Like, this feels like a man who is having an episode, and it's hard to look at.
And, like, the scene where Mina drinks from Dracula, which, again, some pretty good blood. Another, unfortunately, super hairy chest. It's all right. Not to, like, body shame Louis Jourdan in the 70s of all times. But when she wakes up after he's left, first of all, Jonathan is sleeping next to her the entire time, which I believe in my notes, as I say, Jonathan really got cooked there, eh?
This is the blood cucking in reverse.
It is reverse. When she wakes up and she's like clearly extremely distraught and then looks down and sees that there's blood all over her and then like gets up and like describes herself as unclean again, like that's how you lean into the metaphorical aspect of the sexual assault. And then when Van Helsing basically sears her forehead with a piece of Eucharist, like that was hard to watch. A, because the effect is very well done, and B, because she looks so genuinely upset. And then later, when they're on their way back to the castle, and she and Van Helsing are camping out, and they are surrounded by the brides again, and she's so upset, and you can tell that she's very conflicted. And I think her says she has a line along the lines of like, "I too am their sister," and she's like crying, and Van Helsing is like trying to fend them off, and again in a very fatherly way. It was upsetting. Like, there was the performances in this are very realistic and very emotional. So when it goes violent and it leans into the horror, it's genuinely pretty upsetting to watch. But yeah, that kind of rounds out our cast there. Something that made me laugh is on the Wikipedia page for this movie, under the cast, the last entry is Adam Diamond as the baby that gets eaten. But yeah, we finally, I think that marks our second baby eating on screen. Anyway, that kind of rounds out our deal with the performances, and like you said, they really are what carries this production, because there's either extremely heightened visual effects or, none visual effects. So this is going to be carried by the performances, which on the whole are very good, with the unfortunate exception of Dracula, which is a pattern that we've been seeing, and I think we're going to continue to see. In terms of kind of little things that we haven't discussed that we want to chat about before we move on into a couple of things, I really liked the way that they styled the vampires in this, where they did red contacts that covered the whites of their eyes.
Oh yeah, no, that was really cool.
That was fucking sick, dude. And I loved that on Lucy and Mina, when they'd first been bitten, and then in every sequential scene, they started out with like teeny little fangs, and then they kind of got bigger and bigger as they got further and further into vampirism. I thought that was a nice touch. And I thought that the fangs looked pretty good. Sometimes they can look really goofy. Did you know, Will, that this is actually the first Dracula film to have fangs on screen?
You don't say.
You don't say. But yeah, I thought this was kind of fun because we got a lot of little bits that we haven't seen so far. That we got the little kids saying "Blue Fur Lady," which is a direct quote and a very strange one to include, but I thought that was kind of funny. And that we got Dracula in bat, wolf, and mist form, 3 for 3. They really got their money's worth from the fog machine, because they used that shit whenever they had a chance. But I didn't hate it.
I think I'm gonna do, if I may, my roundup on the fashion and looks in this version, and I gotta say, I don't know. I don't think this one leapt out at me. A lot of the costuming is pretty good, is pretty time period accurate, particularly a lot of the stuff that Mina is wearing. I feel like it suits her character better than a lot of what we've seen before. But as far as the men's looks, not much to go on. Even Dracula, unfortunately, Dracula, he looks like his look. He has this very long, kind of high-collared black jacket. There's no real other detail in it. And the vibe is very much lead singer of German industrial goth band.
Oh, no.
In parentheses, derogatory.
It should be derogatory. That's a low blow, dude. But you're completely correct. I found the costuming to be so boring that the only notes I had on it were for the way that they did the vampires. I think you're right about Mina, though. I think she had the best costuming. But you are, nail on the head. Boring all around, which is too bad. And I cannot unsee industrial Dracula now.
I mean, even the whole spiel about the sensuality of monsters.
Ugh.
Come on, that's some mid 90s Marilyn Manson bullshit.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
there.
It's just gross. Ew. Am I okay? How many boxes of dirt did they say there are in the novel? Because I feel like the past couple films we've seen, it's been 10 or 15. It's not a huge number, right?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
I can't either.
I will put in the notes, but yeah, it was not 50 boxes.
It wasn't 50,
that.
Right? Okay, because I was like, am I insane, or does 50 boxes sound fucking crazy?
I know that London's a big city, but holy shit.
Jesus H. That's too many goddamn boxes. Did this tick the box of somebody's dog being a wolf? Kind of. Like, there was a couple that looked like weird Shibas, but, like, they were closer to wolves than, like, just a husky. Or a fucking German Shepherd.
Yeah, we are getting as close to wolves as we're gonna get for a while.
But we did have a real live bat instead of, like, plastic bat on a string. That's new.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a fruit bat, and to the detriment of this movie's spookiness, it is a very cute fruit bat.
It's really cute.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is the point of maybe trying to see Dracula as a good guy, because if Dracula is so bad, then why is he a sky puppy?
I guess that kind of brings us to where we're putting this Dracula in the grand ranking.
I think in the quadrants that we laid out, he's going really far into the rapey quadrant.
Yeah, completely
further than
agree.
we've seen any Dracula so far.
This is the rapiest of the Draculas, which is too bad. And the problem is that he thinks he's a sexy Dracula, but he's not. He's a rapey Dracula. I would say that in terms of ranking him, I'm going to put him pretty low. Maybe like 1 or 2 above Turkish Dracula.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. He's not punching stagehands, but he's not doing that much better.
He's not, which is too bad. Yeah, this was okay. Overall, I think it's worth watching if you A, split it into parts, and B, want something that's like as close to the novel as we're probably gonna see. Like, it's worth watching. But it is by no means a perfect film.
I would even say if you just want to see a version of the like rescuing Mina and fighting Dracula portion of the book, just watch like the last hour of this, because it's done so well. The mounting action is fantastic. The travel back to Castle Dracula is really well done. And I think even the fight and final defeat of Dracula is just filmed with a lot more pizzazz and a lot more action than you've seen so far. So if you've been missing that from our last couple versions, yeah, just check out the last hour.
It's a good time. And I thought that, yeah, you're totally right that they kept the sense of urgency, and that's been lacking in some of the films we've watched recently in particular. One last thing I wanted to add in before we pick our notes from each other is that we got a wall crawl shot, and I love the concept of Dracula crawling down the wall. I think that's a really striking image. Why did it look like that?
Why did it look like that? Can you explain what this looked like? Because the best I can come up with is it looks like Dracula's trying to do like a butterfly stroke on
literally that's what I was gonna say. It looks so goofy. It looks like he's trying to do the worm with his arms out, which is pretty much doing the butterfly. It's not good. It's silly. Anyway, I'm gonna look at your notes here and pick my favorite quote here. I think I'm gonna go with "Yes, old Whitby guy" in all caps. Because, we get old Whitby guy. It's been a minute since we've got him. I don't think we've seen him on screen yet, so I was pleased to see that, and I liked your enthusiasm there.
Thank you. I'm gonna try... Oh, no, I know what it is. My favorite note of yours is psychedelic bride sequence complete with bag baby.
That's my Instagram bio now, frankly.
That is my favorite experimental 70s art band.
Yeah, psychedelic bride sequence or bag baby.
Both. It is
both.
It's a collaboration.
Hell yes. And well, I guess that brings us to our final segment here, which is the reading of the tweet. Do you have a tweet this week, or should I do a tweet?
I'm happy to do one. I gotta look at our
collection of tweets, because at this point in time, we have become the receptacle for all Dracula-related humor content on the internet.
This one, again, comes from expert Dracula tweeter at Zach Silberberg. Also expert We Bought a Zoo tweeter. This one is, woke Dracula be like, I want to use your pronouns.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's a
The
good one.
follow-up to this tweet is "This is nothing." So I disagree.
You know what? Dream guest on the pod, Zach Silverberg.
Yeah, I'm putting it on the vision board.
Well, I guess next time we will be back at you, I believe, with the 1979 Dracula starring Frank Langella. We were hoping to watch a Pakistani version of Dracula called Zindalash, but we're having trouble finding it with English subtitles. So if anybody out there is a wizard and could send something our way, if for some bizarre reason you have access to this film with English subtitles, please hit us up on Instagram, which we have now. We are at TransylvaniaXPod. Give us a follow for some ship hosting.
Yes, please do. I did a casting of Dracula on Twitter from the Oscars, just based entirely off the outfits people were wearing. I posted as a story on our Instagram, and it was a good stupid time.
We also have a reel of you going to a vintage toy convention and finding all of the weird Dracula toys. So if you want niche content like that mostly Will is doing, please give us a follow. We would love to see you. But with that, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye!